The story of the Middle Ages begins not with a loud ending, dramatic collapse, or sudden darkness, but with a long, uneven transition during which the familiar rhythms of Roman life slowly loosened their grip on Europe. Cities that once echoed with official announcements, legal debates, and orderly trade routines continued to exist, yet their connections weakened as roads cracked, taxes faltered, and imperial authority thinned into memory. For ordinary families, daily life did not suddenly feel like history had changed chapters, because people still woke up to farm, trade, pray, argue, and celebrate, even while larger systems quietly shifted around them. Roman emperors faded from practical influence in the West, but Roman habits, language, and ideas lingered in kitchens, marketplaces, and law courts long after statues crumbled. As central power weakened, local leaders stepped forward, sometimes as protectors, sometimes as opportunists, often becoming both depending on circumstances and perspective. These leaders relied less on written law and more on personal loyalty, shared defense, and mutual obligation, reshaping how power felt on a human level. Villages grew more important than distant capitals because safety depended on nearby relationships rather than faraway promises. Land became the most reliable source of wealth, since moving goods across long distances grew riskier and less predictable. Farming life, therefore, shaped society deeply, influencing calendars, traditions, and expectations for generations. People measured time less by official dates and more by seasons, festivals, and harvest cycles that felt immediate and meaningful. Meanwhile, Christianity spread steadily across Europe, offering spiritual structure and community during uncertain times. Church leaders preserved literacy, learning, and record-keeping while adapting religious practices to local cultures. Monasteries emerged as centers of stability where prayer, education, and agriculture blended into structured daily routines. These monasteries also protected books, copying texts that might otherwise have vanished, quietly shaping the future while focusing on the present. As Roman rule receded, new groups moved across Europe, sometimes peacefully, sometimes violently, but always leaving cultural marks. Goths, Franks, Angles, Saxons, Lombards, and others formed kingdoms that mixed Roman traditions with their own customs. These new kingdoms were less centralized but deeply personal, often built around family lines and warrior bonds. Loyalty mattered intensely because protection depended on people you knew rather than abstract institutions. This reliance on personal bonds gradually formed the roots of feudal relationships. In this emerging system, land was granted in exchange for service, protection, and loyalty, binding individuals together in layered obligations. Kings depended on nobles, nobles depended on knights, knights depended on land and peasants to support their role. Peasants depended on protection from conflict and theft. Everyone depended on cooperation, even when inequality was obvious. Life became more local and more predictable, yet also more vulnerable to change. When crops failed, communities suffered together. When leadership was strong, stability followed. When leadership failed, hardship spread quickly. Castles began as simple fortifications, serving as safe places during attack rather than symbols of luxury or pride. Over time, these fortifications became permanent features of landscapes and imaginations. Warfare changed as well, focusing more on local disputes than imperial campaigns. Weapons, armor, and tactics reflected this shift toward regional conflict. Yet war remained only one part of medieval life. Trade never disappeared, even though it shrank and adapted. Markets continued, often linked to fairs, river routes, and religious festivals. Craftspeople preserved skills passed down through families, ensuring continuity despite instability. Music, storytelling, and oral tradition flourished because memory replaced widespread literacy. Stories preserved history, morals, humor, and identity across generations. Education moved slowly, but curiosity never vanished. Children learned by watching adults, copying tasks, and absorbing community expectations naturally. The Middle Ages, therefore, did not begin as an age of ignorance, but as an age of adaptation. People responded creatively to uncertainty rather than surrendering to chaos. They reused Roman stones to build new homes. They reshaped old laws to fit new realities. They blended traditions instead of discarding them. Faith offered hope when certainty was rare. Community offered strength when institutions weakened. Identity shifted from empire-wide citizenship toward local belonging. Borders mattered less than relationships. Trust replaced distance. Promises replaced paperwork. As Rome's political shadow faded, Europe's cultural roots tangled and deepened. Languages slowly evolved from Latin into early forms of French, Spanish, Italian, and others. These changes happened gradually, unnoticed by the people speaking them. Art became more symbolic, emphasizing meaning over realism. Architecture focused on function before beauty. Daily routines shaped worldview more than ideology. Life felt smaller in scale but closer in connection. History did not pause, it reshaped itself quietly. The Middle Ages began not as a fall into darkness, but as a long mourning fog through which new patterns, values, and societies slowly became visible, setting the stage for castles, kingdoms, conflicts, and creativity that would define centuries to come. As generations grew within this changing world, people no longer measured success by imperial ambition, but by survival, stability, and reputation within communities that felt small yet deeply interconnected. The idea of belonging shifted toward land and lordship, where identity grew from who protected you, who you worked for, and who stood beside you during danger or celebration. Kingship itself transformed because rulers traveled constantly, relying on personal presence, symbolic gestures, and shared meals to maintain authority rather than distant bureaucracy. Royal power depended on negotiation as much as command, since cooperation from nobles mattered more than written decrees. Assemblies, councils, and personal oaths formed the backbone of political life. Justice became local and flexible, shaped by custom, mediation, and community memory rather than uniform codes. This flexibility allowed societies to function despite limited communication across regions. Punishment focused on restoring balance instead of enforcing abstract law. Honor and reputation held real weight, guiding behavior as strongly as fear of consequence. Women played complex roles within households, farms, and noble courts, managing property, teaching children, and sometimes ruling lands during absence or transition. Family networks, therefore, shaped power just as strongly as armies. Marriage became a political tool as well as a social institution, linking alliances across regions. The church influenced everyday life deeply, marking time through bells, festivals, fasts, and celebrations. Religious calendars structured weeks and seasons, offering rhythm and meaning. Pilgrimage slowly developed as a shared experience that connected distant communities emotionally and culturally. Church buildings became gathering places for worship, learning, and decision-making. Priests and monks acted as mediators, teachers, and record keepers. Education survived unevenly, but curiosity remained alive wherever stories were told and questions asked. Manuscripts passed through careful hands, preserving memory in fragile forms. Art reflected belief rather than realism, focusing attention on moral lessons. Symbols spoke where words could not reach. Illness and hardship remained part of daily life, shaping humility and resilience. Medical knowledge blended observation with tradition, faith, and experimentation. Communities relied on shared care, herbal remedies, and experience rather than formal training. Feasts and festivals offered relief from hardship, reinforcing bonds across social divisions. Music, games, and competitions brightened village life. Humor remained a survival tool rather than a distraction. Children learned resilience early through responsibility rather than instruction. Work taught patience and cooperation, seasonal labor tied individuals to nature's pace. Weather influenced fortune more strongly than politics. Environmental awareness, therefore, became instinctive rather than theoretical. Despite hardship, creativity thrived in everyday forms. Clothing styles reflected both tradition and practicality. Food traditions adapted to local resources and seasons. Craftsmanship expressed pride in skill rather than innovation alone. Markets revived slowly as stability increased. Trade routes reopened gradually through rivers, coastal travel, and trusted paths. Coins returned to circulation unevenly, barter remained common. Communication relied on messengers and word of mouth, news traveled slowly but mattered deeply. Stories carried information as much as entertainment, legends blended memory with meaning. The concept of Europe itself remained loose and undefined. People identified first with village, then lord, then faith. Large-scale identity developed slowly over centuries. Violence existed, yet was limited by practical constraints. Armies were small and local. Conflict often ended through negotiation rather than conquest. Castles evolved into administrative centers as much as military ones. Their presence reshaped landscapes and authority alike. Stone architecture symbolized permanence amid uncertainty. Power became visible rather than distant. Trust remained personal rather than institutional. History advanced quietly through habit. Change felt normal rather than dramatic. Innovation occurred through adjustment rather than invention. The Middle Ages, therefore, unfolded as a long process rather than a clear beginning. No single year marked transformation. No universal experience defined the age. Instead, countless small choices shaped societies that learned to live without empire while building new forms of order. These societies valued loyalty, tradition, and shared responsibility. They preserved knowledge unevenly yet meaningfully. They balanced fear with faith. They endured through cooperation. They adapted through necessity. As the medieval world slowly settled into rhythm, it laid foundations for future growth, conflict, and imagination, proving that history does not require collapse to change direction, only people willing to reshape their lives within shifting circumstances.